You didn't do anything wrong. You walked in, you sat down, you were present. And somewhere in the first 30 seconds, without a word exchanged, the room made a decision about you. People chose their words a little more carefully. Someone who was mid-sentence paused just slightly before continuing. The energy shifted in a way you felt 100 times but never quite been able to name. And then later, maybe months later, maybe years, someone tells you. They say they found you intimidating when they first met you. And you look at them, and you genuinely don't know what they're talking about.
Because from the inside, none of it felt like power. It felt like just being in a room. Here's what nobody tells you about that. The things that read as intimidating to the people around you aren't character flaws. They're not coldness. They're not arrogance. They're a specific set of traits, built by a specific generation in a specific era, that a stranger's nervous system reads as a warning before their brain has had time to catch up. And for a Gen X man who has been moving through the world this way for 50 years, understanding exactly what's happening and what it costs is long overdue. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being in a room full of people who have already decided something about you that isn't true, who are being careful around a version of you that doesn't exist, who are managing their own anxiety about what you might be thinking, when the honest answer is, not much. You're just here.
You learned a long time ago not to take it personally. You adapted. You developed a version of yourself for public situations, slightly warmer at the edges, slightly more legible, because you understood without being told that the unedited version made people uncomfortable. What you probably never examined is where the original traits came from, because they didn't arrive randomly. A generation of men raised in the 1970s and 1980s under a very specific cultural instruction. Keep it together. Figure it out yourself. Don't perform emotions you don't feel. Developed a particular way of being in the world. Self-contained, direct, comfortable in silence, slow to reassure others, and slower to seek reassurance themselves. Those traits were never about intimidation. They were adaptations, built for a particular environment, carried forward into every room since. The world reads them as threat. What they actually are is a lot more specific than that, because each one has a documented psychological mechanism behind it. And once you understand the mechanism, the room's reaction stops being a mystery and stops being something you need to fix. In 2002, psychologists Amy Cuddy, Susan Fiske, and Peter Glick at Princeton University published research establishing that people evaluate strangers on two dimensions almost immediately: warmth and competence. The finding that matters here is this: high competence on its own doesn't create trust. It's the combination of warmth and competence that does. High competence without visible warmth, without the performed signals that say, "I'm safe, I'm approachable, I mean you no harm," triggers a specific response in the observer. Not admiration, wariness. The operative word is performed, because the warmth the research describes isn't warmth in the genuine sense. It's the social signaling of warmth, the small, constant, largely automatic performances that tell a stranger's nervous system that everything is fine. Smiling by default, checking faces for approval after speaking, softening the edges of direct statements. A Gen X man who was raised not to perform what he doesn't feel doesn't run those signals. Not because he's cold, because he was taught, explicitly or by example, that performing emotions you don't feel is a form of dishonesty, and his nervous system never got the message that the performance was the point.
The second layer comes from research on introversion and social perception. Susan Cain's synthesis of introversion research, drawing on decades of studies, documents that introverted individuals who process before responding, hold eye contact longer, and remain calm in situations where others display visible anxiety are consistently misread by observers as aloof, disengaged, or threatening. Not because of what they do, because of what they don't do. The absence of performed anxiety reads, to an anxious observer, as its opposite. Which means the 5 things that quietly intimidate the people around you aren't about who you are. They're about what you don't perform. And understanding each one changes how you carry it. 1. You don't fill silence. Most people patch silence out of nerves. It's a reflex, managing their own discomfort out loud. You don't need to, so you don't. And the room mistakes your calm for judgment. What's actually happening is that silence is functional for you. It's where you think, where you process, where you decide whether what you're about to say is worth saying. To your nervous system, a pause is neutral. To the nervous system of someone who needs constant audio confirmation that everything is fine, your neutrality reads as a verdict. You're not judging them. You're thinking. But they can't tell the difference from the outside. 2. You say things once. No hedging, no I think maybe. No checking faces after to see if it landed right. You say the thing clearly and let it sit there. For someone who isn't sure of themselves, directness sounds like a closed door. They were expecting a negotiation, and you handed them a conclusion. The absence of the hedge reads as certainty they haven't earned yet. And certainty, in a stranger, triggers the same wariness the Princeton research documented. Not dislike, careful distance. 3. You go quieter when you're uncomfortable. This is the one that costs the most and gets understood the least. When most people are anxious, they get louder. Words tumble out. The volume goes up. The anxiety is visible, and the room responds to it, usually with reassurance, with softening, with someone meeting them where they are. You do the opposite. When you're most unsettled, you get quieter, flatter tone, fewer words, more stillness. And from the outside, that looks exactly like dismissal, like you've checked out, like you're done with this conversation or this person. You're not. You're holding it together without making a scene about it, which is a specific kind of discipline and a specific kind of loneliness, being at your most exposed and having it read as your most formidable. 4. Your standards are visible without being stated. You don't have to say that's not good enough for someone to feel it. The questions you ask, the pause before you respond to an idea, the thing you notice in a plan that everyone else missed. People sense a high bar the way they sense temperature. And when they don't know yet whether they clear it, they manage the uncertainty by keeping distance. It's not about you. It's about them not wanting to find out the answer in front of an audience. 5. You don't need the room's approval, and the room knows it. Watch most social interactions, and you'll see a continuous, quiet economy. Small glances, nervous laughs, tiny bids for confirmation that things are going well. Most people are running this process constantly without realizing it. You're not. You say something and let it land without checking anyone's face. You hold a position without scanning for permission to keep it. And to someone who runs their entire social presence on external validation, a man who clearly doesn't need it reads as, at best, hard to reach. At worst, a kind of threat they can't quite name. What they're actually responding to isn't power. It's the absence of need. And people who are built around need find its absence unsettling. Which brings the only question that actually matters. Not how to make the room more comfortable, but what 50 years of being read this way has cost the man in it. The room's reaction is not your responsibility to solve. Let that sit for a second. Because a Gen X man who has been softening his edges for other people's comfort since his 20s may have forgotten that this was ever a choice. You are not obligated to perform warmth you don't feel. You are not obligated to fill silences that don't need filling. You are not obligated to hedge statements you've thought through clearly. These aren't social failures. They're the way a particular kind of man operates, and the people worth having in your life figured that out early and stayed anyway. What is worth examining, honestly, at this stage, is the cost of the adaptation. The version of yourself you built for public situations. How much of your actual energy goes into making rooms comfortable that were never going to be comfortable regardless of what you did? How much of what people call your reserve is genuine? And how much is the accumulated caution of a man who learned early that being fully legible was more trouble than it was worth? Because there's a difference between choosing to be self-contained and hiding behind it. And at this point in your life, with enough distance from the environments that built the original adaptation, it's worth knowing which one you're doing. The 5 things that intimidate the people around you are not the problem. They never were. What's worth looking at is how many of the right people you've kept at the same distance as the wrong ones. The room went quiet when you walked in, long before you understood why. It'll probably keep doing it, but you understand it now. And a man who understands what's happening stops spending energy on a problem that was never his to solve, and starts putting that energy somewhere it actually matters. If this landed, subscribe. More coming, built for exactly where you are. And if you caught the last video, the one about decision fatigue and what it's doing to Gen X mental performance, it runs directly alongside this one. That video was about the cost of being the man everyone brings their problems to. This one is about the cost of being the man nobody quite feels comfortable approaching. Same man, the weight runs in both directions. You were never the problem in the room. You were just the part of it nobody knew how to read.